Good evening, everybody. My name is Amalia Weber. I'm the program specialist here at Rochester Hills Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's Smart Towns program, China's Past and Present. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Firstly, tonight's program will be recorded and available to view about 1 week from tonight on our YouTube page and on the RHPL website shortly after. We ask that audience members please silence or turn off their cell phones before we begin in order to avoid any disturbances during the presentation. Our next program is Birdwatching and Birding, which will be an in-person event on Thursday, September 29th at 7 p.m. You can sign up for that at calendar.rhpl.org. Tonight's program is presented in partnership with Smart Towns, a lifelong learning program for everyone in the community, led by educational organizations in Rochester, Rochester Hills, and Oakland Township, Michigan. Smart Towns offers lectures, presentations, and courses that introduce the participants to all aspects of the topic and are presented by experts in their respective fields of study. So, without further ado, please welcome our presenter, Dr. Joy Jiang.
Good evening, everyone. Before I start, I want to just sort of get a feel of how much you know about China and what brings you here. So how much do you know about China and what brings you here tonight? Anyone? Yes?
I know very little. That's why I'm here.
Okay. All right. Yes?
About 5 years ago, I was able to visit Shanghai and was very impressed at a city that was basically built since 1980. Very new infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious to hear what you feel the long-term outlook is for that entire community.
Okay. All right. Anyone? Yes? Wow. How long? Couple of years. About what time? 6 years ago. All right. Yeah, Frank, you want to say something? Okay. Many times. Okay. All right. Okay. So what I try to do today is I so quickly walk through the history of China, and then I want to go into more details on 3 events I feel like have very long-lasting kind of impact on China, and then touch upon a little bit on what happened since 1949 and maybe since 1979, and then I want to leave at least half an hour for questions and then answers. All right, so this is from CIA, the World Fact Book. It's not a bad summary. It dates from at least 1200 BC and alternated between periods of unity and disunity under a succession of imperial dynasties. And then after World War II, to be specific, 1949, the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, established an autocratic socialist system. So that's a pretty good summary, to be able to summarize China in such a short paragraph. So it's a quick kind of, again, CIA fact book will give you this. It is ruled by a political bureau standing committee made up of 9 members. So that's the top 9 members of the Communist Party. And then the president, Xi Jinping. It kind of has 3 branches, People's Congress, and then a judicial branch, Supreme People's Court. But of course, the Congress is more like a rubber stamp because it's an autocratic kind of a system, right? And then it has these are the holidays, New Year's Day, Qing Ming is late March, early April. It is a holiday when people would visit the tombs of their parents, grandparents, and just to pay homage to the loved ones and deceased ones. And then Labor Day, that's the May 1st is the Labor Day for many parts of the world. Duanwu Festival is actually the lunar year May the 5th. So when it says June 1st, it's not quite accurate because lunar year dates would alternate from year to year. So that's when you will see dragon boats races and stuff. I think they have it in London, Ontario, and in many actually cities in the U.S. as well. And then Zhongqiu, which just passed, it's September 10th this year. So that is the August 15th in the lunar year. And then it's supposed to be the night when the moon is the roundest, fullest, okay? And then so that's like harvest festival. It's when families are supposed to be together because the moon is full, right? And then the families should be together. So people eat mooncakes. It's funny now, Costco actually sells mooncakes in Ann Arbor and in Madison Heights, around it's called Mid-Autumn Festival, right? And then if you go after the festival, then you can get it for half of the price. So sometimes I would actually, but we don't have it in our Auburn Hills ones. Obviously, there's not enough Chinese population there, right? So it's interesting. A lot of the food items from Taiwan and then from Hong Kong now can be found in Costco in Ann Arbor and Madison Heights, but not in Auburn Hills. So companies are really become very, very accurate in who they are targeting now, right? And then there's a national day, which is October the 1st. Now in Taiwan, they celebrate National Day October the 10th. That's for Republic of China. So October the 1st is for People's Republic of China, which is the mainland part, okay? Republic of China exists in Taiwan, so that's a different thing. Educational systems kind of similar. So you have 6 years elementary, 3 years middle school, and then 3 years of high school. And then for the past about 30 years, the first 9 years are supposed to be mandatory and then free. But there are other fees, right? So it's mandatory and then free from government's perspective, then you ended up probably pay some kind of fee elsewhere. College and then graduate school is interesting. It's 3 years, but now China has introduced this business school, professional school idea. So there are MBA programs that lasted only for 2 years now. Literacy rate, in 2010, that's when I checked, it was like 95.9 literacy rate, okay? And then higher for male, and then lower for female still, okay? So religion, folk religion, Buddhism, Christian, and I will talk about Christian in next slide. Some Muslim, some very, 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 very small percentage Hindu, Jewish, and then there are a lot who would claim to be atheists, okay? Interestingly, The Economist actually had this article in 2021 saying Protestant Christianity is booming in China because it has the highest growth rate in Christian conversion, right? So now if you look at let me see, that growth rate is quite sharp. And then in 2014, actually, International Mission News says China on course to become world's most Christian nation, because it's not like percentage-wise, but it's going to have the highest number of Christians just because of the base is so big, right? It's 1.4 billion right now. It's 5%. If it becomes 10%, that's going to be a lot of Christians there, right? So, but I have to say there are a lot of weird kind of branches of we can even say, when there's a booming of Christianity, there are also some kind of extreme, weird kind of variations of Christianity that would appear. So some of this have, I would say, also like tarnished the image of Christianity to a certain extent. But Christian faith has been growing. So in most of the universities, for instance, in China, they now have some kind of fellowship. I was very surprised 10 years ago when I visited Shanghai. my daughter did a study abroad in Shanghai, Fudan University, and then she told me there's a fellowship, Christian fellowship in Fudan University. So most of the big universities now actually have some kind of Christian fellowship, which is great. So this is a map I just want to show you because there's two main rivers, right? This is Yellow River, zigzagging one, and then there's the Yangtze River. In China, actually, we call it Long River, Changjiang. It's the world's third longest river, so we call it Changjiang, and it's more well known as Yangtze River in the world, I guess. The Chinese civilization was actually born in this area, so it's on the Yellow River. It's very inland, as you can see, away from the coast. Now this map is if you look at the map of China from Republic of China in Taiwan, it actually would include this part. The Mongolia used to be part of China, but then Soviet Union actually kind of twisted the arm of the Chinese government and then made Mongolia an independent country. So the map from Taiwan's perspective is somewhat like this. The borderline is somewhere there. It's like a leaf shape. Now the mainland said it's like a rooster. I don't know. Does that look like a rooster? Yeah. Sort of like that, right? If that's the head, right? That's the little feet, I guess. Yeah. So that's Taiwan. Geography-wise, oh wait, sorry, what happened? What happened? I jumped forward that much. Okay, so the coastal area, it tends to be the most advanced area, and then there's a big chunk of desert in the northwest part of China, and then very mountainous in the south and southwest part of China. So even though the land area of China is very similar to that of U.S., the arable land actually area is much, much smaller than the U.S. So my father-in-law, who was a farmer in China, when he visited Canada and U.S., he was like, all this land not planted, right? So it's like, I'm like, yeah, because, we have enough land. We don't have to plant all the arable land. So, yeah, and if, look at this. These are land carved out of the slope of the mountains. So it's terraced land. Because there's so little land, they would actually plant even, I once visited a mountainous village, so they would carve out this big of a parcel of land and then planted rice in it on the slope of the hills because there's such a shortage of arable land. Okay, so this is the Li River in the southwest part of China, a very beautiful place in Guilin, and then the Great Wall, of course, and then Mount Everest, desert. So if you look at the terrain, so you can see a lot of areas are very dry, no forest and everything. So the arable land tends to be in this area. Okay. So these are the dynasties. Started. Whoa. Okay, I'm not very good with this. Okay, so Shah is the first dynasty with some written kind of history. So that's why before that there are legendary dynasties that we usually do not include in the formal history of China. So Shah, Shang. So Shang is where you see a lot of bronze, artifacts that are still available today, so you can actually visit and see. Zhou dynasty is the longest lasting dynasty, and then it's officially the feudal society period of China. Okay, so the emperor of Zhou would actually, initially it's his sons who will be okay, you're given this piece of land, you will become kind of the king of that land, right? So all the sons will be like the dukes in Europe. right? So that's the feudal system period, which lasted 800 years, Zhou dynasty. But towards the later part of Zhou, actually that feudal system already kind of fallen apart because the sons might be very loyal to the emperor. The grandchildren will be less loyal to the emperor. And then they started to fight each other, try to grab more land, more resources, right? So and then the emperor started losing power, losing control of all the small kingdoms, and then some kingdom ended up becoming some the dominant king, and then would becoming Bazu, it's called. It's like, so there are 5 different, over the later history of Zhou, different state would become more dominant. And then so after the reason why the first period is called spring and autumn is because Confucius wrote a history of that period called spring and autumn. So that's why that period is referred to as spring and autumn. And then after that, the states started to fight each other, so it became a period called warring states that lasted quite some years. And then at the end, 7 states ended up standing, after a lot of fighting between these small kingdoms. And then that 7 states lasted for some time until this guy, the first emperor, Qing Shi Huang, ended up conquering. Qing Dynasty is on that Yellow River area, okay? So Qing Shi Huang did some reform, ended up having a very powerful, militarily very powerful kind of kingdom, and then it conquered all the other 6 states and unified China into this big Qing Dynasty. Unfortunately, this guy also, he was very powerful, but he was also very much into building grandiose projects, right? Great Wall was built. He built like about hundreds of palaces. So every time he conquered a city, that city has a palace. He's like, I like that. I'll build it in my capital, right? He conquered another kingdom. That king has a really great palace. I want to replicate in my capital. So he ended up building a lot of palaces, Great Wall, and then also a gorgeous mausoleum for himself, right? The Terracotta Warriors was actually an army of Terracotta Warriors for himself. He started building that when he very soon after he unified China, he started building that mausoleum for himself. And then he also did a lot of infrastructure building and stuff. So he is a very influential emperor, first emperor, but he also exhausted the resources of the country. So he thought his empire is going to last for 10,000 generations. It ended up, look how many years only, right? So his son was emperor for 3 years, and then the whole thing was overthrown. Okay, and then after that is Han Dynasty, and then Han Dynasty fell apart. It became 3 kingdoms. Anyone know of 3 kingdoms? That's one of the, you definitely, one of the classic novels was based on the history of 3 kingdoms. It's actually called the 3 kingdoms, right? My professor in English actually about 10 years ago before she died, finished actually translating 3 kingdoms, retranslate 3 kingdoms into English, actually. So that's a period of disunity. Remember, the CIA workbook says unity and then disunity. So unity, disunity. And then Sui Dynasty actually unified China again. And then Sui was replaced by Tang. Tang Dynasty is considered as the golden age of China, so unity again. Song Dynasty is my favorite dynasty. If I had to be thrown back into a dynasty to live, that would be the time I want to live, not any other. Yuan Dynasty is actually when Mongolians took over China and established the Yuan Dynasty, when the ethnic Chinese were considered as the bottom of the class, in the society. Even that lasted like 96, 97 years. And then that followed by a very powerful dynasty called the Ming Dynasty. And then that Ming Dynasty was also quite keen in building Great Wall. So Great Wall was first started by the Qing, first emperor, and then the majority of the existing Great Wall were actually built during the Ming Dynasty. Okay, and then that very powerful Ming Dynasty, when I say powerful, for some years the GDP of China during the Ming Dynasty made up about like 57% of the world economy, so it was really powerful. Then it was taken over by a small tribe, northern tribe in the north, taken over the whole country, actually established the last dynasty called Qing Dynasty. And that dynasty actually was the longest lasting kind of a dynasty in the whole history. That was overthrown in 1911. The uprising took place on October the 10th. That's why the Republic of China still celebrates the National Day on October the 10th, because that was supposed to be the time, the date that the Republic of China was established, dynasties were ended. Okay, so that was really a quick run of the history of China. There are a few movies if you're interested. So this movie, Hero, is actually about the Qing Dynasty. It's actually about how the first emperor kind of unified the country. Well, I didn't quite like the sort of the stand of the director. He kind of, I think he praised the first emperor too much, for my taste. But that's a movie about, for that period. And then House of Flying Daggers is actually kind of set in the Tang Dynasty. I don't see too much kind of historical background, but it's supposed to be for the. And then the final one, the last one is the Crouching Tiger and the Hidden. Wait, what is that one? Hidden Dragon. Yeah, that one was actually kind of supposedly to be based on the last dynasty. So if you want to watch some movies, I'm sure the library probably would have all these three there. Okay. So that's the old money, it's coins in China. And then today, of course, the reason why yuan, the unit of today's currency, renminbi, is called yuan is because it's a round yuan. It sounds similar, circle, right? This is like a circle. Okay. So if we want to put kind of in the world history, so this Qing, the first that dynasty, it's about 220, started 221 BC, and Han Dynasty is kind of concurrent with the Roman Empire. Okay, warring states, and then fall of Roman Empire kind of was divided into East and then West about 476 CE. And then beginning of Islam, that's when Tang Dynasty was established. And Song Dynasty was started in the 9th century, and then lasted, 907 lasted until 1279. And then again, the Mongolian dynasty lasted about 97 years, and the Ming Dynasty, and finally the last dynasty is the Qing Dynasty. So what I put Columbus sails to the New World in 1492 here is because during the Ming Dynasty, actually a eunuch actually made 7 kind of sails all the way to Africa, right? And then his treasure ships were like at least like 20 times bigger than Columbus' ship, and then his fleet is like made of like 20,000 plus people. So it's like huge fleet, and then the shipbuilding technology was actually quite advanced if you think about how large these ships are, and then how big the fleets, actually the size of the fleet. But then because these trips, the goals of these trips are so different from that of Columbus, right? The Columbus, they sailed to search for new wealth and treasures and stuff like that. The emperor of Ming allowed this eunuch to make these trips because he wanted the world to see how great an emperor he is. You know, so there's no benefits, there's no trade involved, there's not a lot of benefits, but it's a huge resource drainer for the empire, right? So after the 7 trips, when the grandson of the founding emperor realized, hey, these trips are costing me a lot of money, and then not only like I didn't get a lot in return, and then all these small kingdoms overseas, like for instance, in the Pacific Islands, when they came, I had to give them a lot of gifts because I'm this great emperor, right? So he actually started having a policy saying, no more trade, no more sailing, not even a boat is allowed on the sea. So it's like a complete kind of a closed kind of economy. It's a turn of policy. But then, of course, that actually also kind of foreshadowed the decline of the dynasty as well. So it's interesting. And then actually, the ministers of the emperor was so angry because of these trips, like costing the empire so much money. The defense minister burned all the shipbuilding blueprints and everything to prevent anyone from building the ships and then actually go on the sea. It's just a ridiculous, well, ridiculous from today's perspective, but I guess understandable from the emperor's perspective because this is draining our, resources, right? So the map changed. So if you look at, these are the warring state. The Qing Dynasty, Qing Kingdom is here. So the first emperor conquered all these 6 other kingdoms and then unified China. Okay, and then the last dynasty, Qing, right, which lasted like almost 400 years. So that's the map of Qing Dynasty. So if you look at Soviet Union or Russia history, actually took, if you based on this map, Russia took at least 160. What is that? I'm trying to converting. So 1.6 million square kilometers of land from China. So Russia is the one nation that has been able to really take advantage of. Okay.
So is that land variable or any?
Siberia is here, right? Yeah, and then it's interesting if you think about the most famous poet of China is Li Bai in Tang Dynasty. I'm sure you probably remember some of the poems by Li Bai, right? So it's like a household name. Li Bai was actually born in today's Kazakhstan, somewhere there, So a big chunk of today's Russia used to be part of the Qing Dynasty, and then of course because China declined. Opium War and all that, and then started losing land. And then Russia is the one country that took most of the land from China. Okay.
Is the land any good for anything?
I don't know. Siberia is now actually the land was fertile. It's just very cold. So if you look at this area, right? So rice from this area was was some of the best tasting rice. You can only grow one crop because it's cold, right? So in Vietnam, for instance, from Song Dynasty and earlier, they were able to grow 3 crops of rice in a year because of how warm the area is, right? And then that, it's called Zhancheng Dao. That rice was later actually introduced into China. That actually, some believe, actually saved a lot of people's lives because, how much, but it does not taste very good. But the rice from this area, you can only grow one because the growing season is very short, but it's really it tastes very well because of the. So yeah, and then it's interesting, Siberia today, agriculture is kind of booming, but the majority of those who are actually doing the farming there are actually from China. So actually people from China actually rented the land and then actually doing farming in Siberia today, which caused some conflicts in the local area. I don't know. And then also there's a very good port here. So Russia used to not have a port on this coast, but because this part of the land was taken by Russia, so they gained a port here. So strategically, if that part of the world becomes, navigable, then that can be a big deal. I don't know. Okay. So that's the timeline. So It's kind of interesting when Confucius lives. That's almost the same time when all these, Greek philosophers live. So it's also about the time, if you think of the Bible, there are 400 years where there's when God was silent, kind of thing, between the end of the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's kind of 400 years of silence, and then that's when all these, I think, philosophers like East and West started to make their appearance. It's kind of interesting, right? So I would just want to focus on, I said 4, I did add it, the communist party taking over later. So the first one I want to mention is the Qing, the first emperor. The importance of the first emperor is actually he abolished the feudal system. Remember that during the Zhou dynasty, it's the feudal system, right? And then he actually abolished the feudalism and established a centralized kind of bureaucracy. So he organized, it's a very tight control society. So every 10 families would be organized into li, and then li's would be organized into xiang, township, and then xiang would be organized into county into Jing would be prefecture, and then that would be organized into 40 commanderies, and then that is ruled centrally. And then that centralized bureaucracy then lasted all the way to today. So that's actually a very influential kind of event because, that means that China stopped feudalism in 2021 BC, while Europe actually continued with that feudal system way into, until 18th century or even 19th century, right? And then he also unified the Chinese scripts. The written language was unified. Now that has a lot of significance because even today, you can speak Cantonese if you were born and raised in Hong Kong, but you use the same written language, right? So that becomes a bounding kind of thing to hold the Chinese culture together because language usually really is the conduit of culture, right? So that has significant impact because he unified the written language of China, and then that has been in use ever since then. And he also standardized the units of measurement. Now the weight, for instance, that measurement system was in use even when I was little. We still use that system. And then the Communist Party switched to the metric system. Okay, so that lasted forever, right? And then the currency was unified, and then he even unified the length of the axis of the chariots. Now he didn't do it for efficiency or whatever, for efficiency, but for efficiency of shipping his armies to all parts of the country in case there's uprising. When you unify the axis of the chariots, then it's standardized, it's easier to make, but also because then the chariots would make kind of grooves on the road, and then that almost becomes like a railway, right, in a way, for the chariots. So for that purpose, he actually unified the length of axis. And then he also built the road system. That's the road system. So it really covers almost the whole size of today's country, right? He also invested in a lot of infrastructure, so the Great Wall palaces, and he also built a Zhengguo canal, a canal that actually led water from a dry area from a wet area to a dry area. So that created a lot more arable land for Qing Kingdom, which actually helped to make Qing Kingdom powerful enough, wealthy enough to actually conquer the rest of the country. So that's why, so he built that political system that lasted forever. Even today, I would say China is a centralized bureaucracy, right? So that lasted. And then the language, and then the road system, so that is still, that's the grooves that chariot actually kind of made, right? And that's the terracotta. And then he replicate his army in these, life-size kind of sculptures and everything. And then because he wanted to lead an army even after he died, So, and then what currently are on exhibit is only like 1/4 of the actual size of his underground army. This guy is crazy. And then he, for instance, for his palaces in the Muslim alone, he actually more than 700,000 people worked. These are all free labor. I mean, he's not going to pay them, right? And then he had very, very strict rules. So if you are asked to go work on a project, if you are late by a day, you'll be killed, or you can be killed. As bad as that. So actually, the reason why Qing Dynasty died was because a bunch of these laborers were was called to work in one of these infrastructure projects, and then there was flood. And then they definitely could not make it on time. So these people are like, we're going to die anyway, so let's just rise against this emperor. So that was the beginning of the end of the Qing Dynasty. Okay. The other thing I want to mention that really has long-lasting impact is this Imperial exam system. So that's like a civil service examination system. That was started, it's kind of some kind of a meritocracy. So it's choosing bureaucrats by merit rather than by birth. So which actually explains why China does not aristocrat kind of class. Ever. Not ever, but for longest time, right? It was started in Sui Dynasty, 605 AD, and lasted in China until 1905. But in the surrounding countries, it spread to Japan, Korea, Vietnam. Actually, Japan and Korea and Vietnam, they used to send their scholars to actually participate in Chinese imperial exams, okay? And then in Vietnam, actually, the last imperial exam actually actually took place in 1919. So this is a very long-lasting system. And then that Mandarin system, as some call it, also influenced the civil service system in Europe. So that is a very, very influential kind of system. It may vary from dynasty to dynasty, but usually it has this 3 layers of exams. So if you pass the entry-level local exam, you become a junior student, down Tongsen. And then if you pass a prefectural kind of exam, you become a certified student or something like that, right? And then if you become a student, then you are during most of the dynasties, you're exempt from statute labor. So, every family would have to, so for instance, you need to build a dam along the river to prevent from flood. Well, every family has to contribute to standard labor. But if you are a student, you don't have to, right? And then you have legal perks. For instance, you don't have to kowtow or kneel down in front of the government officials, which is a dignity, see, right? And then the top performers, top 10%, sometimes 20% of these students would actually get allowance from the government. So now you don't have to go till the land, right? That was a huge thing because tilling the land is backbreaking back then, so it's not fun. So if you are a student, you don't have to do that. And then you can get tax exemption, and you can then, the top performers can also attend government-run school, which would allow you then go past the provincial exam. Once you become you pass that exam, you become a Juren scholar. So if you become a scholar, most of the times you don't have to pay tax. Now, if the tax rate on your land is, let's say, 20%, wow, that's a lot of money. So then your neighbors would be like, okay, put my land under your name. We can split that 20%, right? So you can be someone who's dirt poor, owning nothing. If you become a scholar, you will end up having land, and then your neighbors would send you maids, and then so instantly become gentry class, basically, right? So, and then every 3 years, usually, then you go to the capital city and then participate in the national exam. Usually 300 would pass that and then become a distinguished scholar, or like empress scholar, however you call it, 进士. And then you definitely don't have to pay tax. You don't have to, do that statute labor. And then you are put into a pool for high-ranking positions in the country. So that's where all the bureaucrats ended up choosing. And then the final 300 would actually then go through the emperor's test in the palace, right? The emperor would personally test them. And then the top 3 would then get to parade in the city. And then they are allowed to walk through the center pass in the palace, which only the emperor was allowed to walk. So it's like a highest honor you can have, right? And then sometimes, the emperor would marry his princesses to you, right? So if you think about it, this system basically provides mobility, social mobility. And then this is where the people would go take these imperial exams. It's not a one-day thing. The longest imperial exam can last like 7 to 9 days. Usually it's at least 4 days, 3 nights. And then you have to spend all these days and nights in this little thing, like a boutique, a cubicle. So during the day, you ride on it. At night, you can lower this, and then you can sleep on it. And then you have to bring your own food. And then so basically you spend 4, 3, 4, sometimes 9 days in that little cubicle. So you actually have to be physically fit to be able to complete that damn thing. And then if you visit Nanjing today, they actually still have this in exhibition you can go look at. And then the most interesting thing for you to see when you visit this is they also have all kinds of ways people try to cheat in these exams because the stake is so high, right? So they came up with all kinds of ingenious ways of try to cheat, right? So they had also the, as the cheating goes high, they also increased the level of security, right? So at the end, you have to walk in naked through the exam area and then put your clothes back on, right? And then people still come up with ingenious ways of cheating. I'm sorry, I just like this kind of thing. I'm like, wow. Of course, the problem with this system is they didn't test you STEM. They just test you Confucian classics. Okay, so that is so the Confucian, because they test you Confucianism. So now all people who are literate ended up reading only Confucian classics most of the time. So the brains become very uniform, right? And then also the Confucianism originally proposed by Kongzi, Confucius, and Mengzi, Mencius, was actually cleansed by the emperors through the generations. So they took away things that are not very nice to the emperors and then kept those who tell people to be loyal to the emperors, right? So for instance, Mencius has some quotes which the emperors totally would not like. He said, "People first, society and nation second, emperors last." Emperors won't like that. And then he also said, if the emperor treats his subjects like nothing, like grass, then the subjects can treat emperor like enemy. The emperors don't like that. So all these were taken out, and then what is left is you have to be loyal, you have to be loyal, you have to be loyal to the emperor. So that's, the Confucianism was often, so when Huntington write about clashes of civilization, for instance, he put like Confucianism next to Christian belief and then Muslim, right? But Confucianism is not a religion at all. It's a secular moral philosophy, right? So, and then it is very, very influential, not just in China. But when you think of Confucian societies, it's Japan, it's Vietnam, it's Singapore, right? Taiwan, Hong Kong for sure, right? Korea, for instance, right? So that's why, the one way for me to remember my Korean colleague's name is I'm going to write it out in kanji. So that made it easier for me to remember, what your name is. So kanji is the scholar, educated people in Korea or in Japan, they used to all know Chinese, right? So and then so Confucianism definitely influenced that whole area as well. Some of the main concepts, for instance, ren means benevolence, he is harmony, li is how to explain. It's like manners, etiquette, right? So for Confucius, harmony of the society is very important. So how do you achieve harmony of society? One important thing for him is like each one needs to know your position in the society and perform your duty, right? So he has a quote called 君君臣臣父父子子, right? So it's like, okay, if at the emperor, you do your emperor thing, and then you're at the courtier, you do the court minister, you do the minister's thing. Father needs to do your father, kind of perform your duties of being a father, and the son being a... But again, people, those who are in power tends to emphasize the duties of those who are not as powerful, right? So the emperor would be like, yeah, you be loyal to me, right? But they ignore when Confucius said, you, emperor, needs to be a good king or a good emperor, right? That part they ignore. And then same thing, like the father would be like, you need to be always say yes to me, while Confucius was really saying, hey, you need to perform your fatherly duty first, and then the son perform the son's, filial duties. And so then the world will be a harmonious kind of whole. But at the end, the society tends to emphasize the authority, basically. The authority of the emperor, the authority of the government, the authority of the parents, at the cost of those under, right? And then, because it's a secular moral philosophy, what happens to immortality, right? So the Confucius basically says, hey, you know what? We should try to achieve immortality through virtue, through achievement, and through words. Leave behind writings, great writings and stuff like that. And then he emphasized so much hey, being a scholar or being learned is above everything else, right? So, for instance, one quote everyone in China would be able to know is like, 万般皆下品，唯有读书高. So everything, all career passes are inferior to being a learned person, something like that, right? Okay. And then what about the religion? Well, Confucius is a very this world kind of a focused, right? So one time his student asked, what about death? And Confucius said, 未知生焉知死. I don't even know enough about living. Why should I be concerned about death? Now, which is very different from the Greek philosophies, who tend to say, hey, if the fundamental questions are like, who are you, where are you from, where are you going to go after death, right? No, Confucius is like, I don't even know. You don't even know enough about living. Why are you concerned about death, right? And then what about gods and ghosts? And he's like, respect them and then put them at a distance. So this is Confucianism is a very secular moral philosophy. It's all about being a good person, accomplish things in this life, which has implication for the Confucian societies today, right? So if people in this society were left alone, they tend to do quite well in this world, so to speak, right? Another event that has impact on the sort of the national mentality of China is the Opium War, right? So 1840, basically. Well, it kind of like it put it like more kind of dramatic, simple way. It's like, okay, the Queen of Britain sent envoy to China to see the emperor, saying, hey, how about we trade? The emperor of China is like, we Central Empire. 中国 literally means Central Empire, right? We Central Empire, we have everything. We don't need to trade with you. Okay, so it's like, really? Send warships, right? And then just the bomb opened the door of China. So Opium War took place. China lost miserably. And then that's when Hong Kong Island was ceded in a, what was it, 99-year lease or something to Britain, which ended in 1997. That's when Hong Kong was returned to China, right? And then so Opium War marked the long decline of China, which actually started in the Ming Dynasty, but it really, really became weak. In Ming Dynasty, China already became more kind of enclosed, not as an open kind of open-minded country as Tang Dynasty, but it was still big and kind of advanced in living standards or technology. But Qing Dynasty, when the rest of the world, well, the West, okay, started industrialized revolution and all that, China was trapped in time. So that made China backwards, low in technology, militarily weak, and then lost in the Opium War, and then that continued for many years, which made I think Chinese people kind of very sensitive to this topic. It's like, oh, if we are backwards, we will be beaten again, that kind of mentality. And then during the Qing Dynasty, a lot of treaties were kind of written as a result of China being beaten up by Japan, for instance, by Britain and France and Russia. U.S. was actually the nicer one, I think, in that whole period of time. For instance, one event took place after Opium War. This was a garden of gardens called Yuanmingyuan. It was built to include not just a Chinese-style building, but also like Western-style kind of palaces and everything. So it's a gorgeous palace. And then after Opium War, the Allied army, British, French, Russia, and a few others, German, I think, they looted the palace, and then afterwards they just burned down the whole thing, right? So this was still there. This is still there today from this one, from this whole part. Now that's the only thing you can see. It's right next to Tsinghua University, so if people still visit. So that became a symbol of like the humiliation China suffered, that kind of thing, right? So I mention that because I think that also can explain some of today's thinking when you talk to Chinese people about Taiwan issue, right? So in 1911, Republic China was established, which was basically a nationalist party, Kuomintang, right? And then so it ruled China for quite some years, and then Japan invaded China in 1937, so that lasted 8 years until the World War II ends, and then Japan surrendered, and then China declared the end of the anti-Japanese war. Right after that, 1945, Japanese surrender, then the Communist Party army started fighting with the nationalist army, right? So then the nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek lost, so Republic of China retreated to Taiwan. So the official name of Taiwan today is still Republic of China. So all the way until 1972, 70, was it 72 or 72, I think. Republic of China actually represent the whole China at United Nations. Okay, so I think in 1972, finally United Nations like, okay, looks like there's no way Republic of China is gonna fight and then take back mainland from Communist Party. So they, okay, now we are gonna recognize People's Republic of China, this, as the official representative of China, okay? So that's why mainland considered Taiwan as this renegade province. Basically, you are the lingering of that Republic of China, but the kind of consensus in China was like, if it's not for the Korean War, the Communist army would have taken back Taiwan in 1950-ish. Because of the Korean War, the military force of China was sent to Korea, so they could not, they didn't end up, I don't know, that was some of the thinking at least. So anyway, so that leads to this mainland and Taiwan thing. today. Now, and then when U.S. Actually established a diplomatic relationship with mainland China, right, under President Nixon, so they reached an agreement saying, hey, you know what, we're gonna keep the status quo. Taiwan would not declare independence, right? China would not invade the province, Taiwan. So that was kind of called Shanghai Communique. So they reached an agreement, President Nixon and the communist government. And then in 1992, the three sides, so U.S. kind of brokered this talk between Taiwan, Republic of China, and then mainland, the People's Republic of China. They reached called 1992 consensus, which I think represent the kind of compromise Chinese people are very good at. So basically, let's save face, okay? Put aside the confrontation, save face. That's very important for Chinese, right? So basically say, okay, we all recognize there's only one China, right? But from Taiwan's perspective, that one China is Republic of China. From mainland's perspective, that one China is People's Republic of China. So it's one China, two different interpretations. So now we both save face. And then the world is at peace. So that's a very typical Chinese way of reaching a compromise, okay? And then the US was like, yeah, that's good. Okay, so, okay, that's that. And then I want to talk about the last part, which is like not last part, but the 1949 to 1979, which China went through a period where the communist ideology plus Marxist socialism, right? So the economic system is the socialism where the state owns everything, right? And the ideology is communism. So everybody has to learn what communism is, and then that's where we are aiming for, that kind of thing. Okay, so state own everything, all the resources, make all the planning. So at the beginning of the year, the ministers would say, hey, based on all the statistics, we did some investigation. This year, this province is gonna need 500,000 trucks. That province is gonna need 300,000 trucks, right? And then they say, okay, here, Changchun, the first auto works in Changchun. This year, you're gonna make 300,000 trucks, right? And then the Shanghai auto, well, you're gonna, so all the planning, all the production is planned, essentially. And then that can go so terribly wrong, of course, right? And then resources can be so underutilized. And then also the party has their own agenda, right? Because they were from 1957 to 1970, when China and the US restored the diplomatic relationship, basically China was fighting against both US and the Soviet Union during that period of time. So resources was definitely not gonna be like channeled into like, okay, making like, household items for you. So more resources are gonna channel into, right, well, steel manufacturing, because that goes into making weapons, enable us to fight off Soviet Union if needed, and then US if needed, right? So resources were totally not very well allocated, utilized, and then also people have no incentive to perform, so that leads to very low productivity, and the economy was like terrible. Everything was rationed, and everybody was poor, equally poor, okay? And then also the party constantly have campaigns that ruined lives of millions of people, right? So for instance, in the anti-rightist movement, in 1 year, 4 million intellectuals were persecuted. So Mao Zedong was like, okay, we welcome your criticism. And then intellectuals were like stupid enough to say, yeah, here are my 3 points. That'll help you to improve whatever, right? And then after everybody has expressed their opinion, you are all rightists. You're against the party, against socialism, boom, you'll be sent away to a labor camp somewhere. And then your children will be persecuted, right? So my sister-in-law's father was the editor of a major newspaper in the province, and then he was a very active kind of party member kind of thing. So when Chairman Mao Zedong said, "Welcome your criticism," so he's like, "Yeah, criticize this, criticize that," and then he was put away in a labor camp, and they have 5 children. 5 children were not allowed to go to school, so the wife has to divorce him, and then still, all these kids were prejudiced against, right, discriminated against, so like politically, and it's just horrible, right? So that's 4.6 million, and then when you count their students, their family members who were like, also get into trouble because of that, right? So my professor, for instance, was very careful and cautious kind of person. So when they say, "Here, what is your criticism?" He was like, maybe, we need to have more learned people to lead this university. That's against the party. Now he got into trouble, right? And then another of my professor basically said, "I'm not sure why you take all the professors from Zhejiang University, one of the university in Hangzhou, and put them all into this university. I don't get it." That's anti the party. So you can get into trouble for like little, and then because Chairman Mao Zedong had a quote saying, "Oh, the majority of people are good, revolutionary. Maybe only 5% was bad." 5%, so that becomes a quota, right? So what if, there's nobody who actually said anything? Still, you need to have 5%, right? So one story is like, okay, so everybody was sitting there, so who should be the rightest? And then nobody said anything, and then one guy ended up leaving for the toilet break, and then everybody voted him to be the rightest. And his whole family got into trouble for that. This is just absurd as this thing took place during that time, right? And then same thing. And then, for instance, the Great Leap Forward, probably some of you have heard, where when Mao Zedong had this fancy, if our steel output can catch up with that of Britain and the US, then we would become an industrialized powerhouse, right? So the whole country got into this craze as like, let's make steel. So elementary school students were sent to collect scrap metals. So people would take off doorknobs from their door, and then the wax were taken to put into a stove and then burn and melt it, and then you ended up with a blob of thing, and then they would say, "Oh, that's steel," right? And then so because Mao Zedong wanted the steel output to catch up with. And then because all the people were working on that stupid steel making thing, the crops were left in the field not collected. And then the Great Leap Forward also is because leap forward into communism. Well, in communism, you don't need to own anything, right? So there's no private ownership. Let's all eat together as a commune, right? So you all eat together. All the food were collected into one place. We all eat together in this commune cafeteria. And of course, you eat a lot when you eat free, right? And then pretty soon, all the food were gone, and the crops were not collected, and then people started to starve. We still don't know how many people actually starved to death, but the official number is probably around 30 million, but some scholars said 55 million starved to death. So it's just horrible. There's a movie that reflected that period of time. It's called To Live. It's one of the best, I think, movies coming out of China, if you are interested. And then there's, of course, Cultural Revolution, which basically is trying to abolish all culture, basically. So everything that's considered old needs to be abolished, okay? Again, a lot of casualties, right? So it's ridiculous things happen. So for instance, my mother's dowry include a set of furnitures. On the furnitures were sculptures because her hometown is known for wood carving in the whole country. So obviously it would have wood carvings on the cabinet doors, which was based on a famous classic story in China, Xixiangji, right? And then, of course, that is considered old stuff, needs to be abolished. So my cousin ended up chopping off all the faces of that sculpture. Yeah, so it's, and then the temples, for instance, were smashed. Buddha sculptures, so in my small town, we used to go to this mountain to play, and then there is a big Buddha sculpture, stone sculpture. The head was chopped off by red guards. We used to take pictures with our own heads, you know, on top of that. So all kinds of weirdest things took place. Basically, it destroyed the culture. So Confucius was criticized, right? A lot of classics were considered as bad books. Banning books was horrible. Like, I didn't have anything to read when I was little. So I used to read like anything with some words on it, I'll read it. So it's ridiculous. So people used to use old newspapers to wrap merchandise, right? I would read these. And it's ridiculously stupid, boring stuff, but I don't have anything to read, so I just read that, right? So it's just the culture was completely destroyed during that 10 years. So tradition was disrupted, the whole society, like the whole social structure. So they encourage wife, you know, snitch on husband. Children would report on their parents, right? So I read about a man who actually reported his mother when he was 16, which led to his mother being executed. And then when he later on, you know, came to his senses after 1979, he lived in terrible remorse, right? So, and then almost killed himself. But that was not uncommon. So, you know, family members were encouraged to report on each other, which was totally against Confucianism, because Confucius clearly said, you know, fathers should not, you know, report on your children, and then children are not allowed to, you know, just, even if you really think your father has committed crime, you as a son should not, you know, actually report. So that was, so just completely disrupt the society. Well, then, of course, the economy was almost dead. Everybody was poor. The country was poor. Per capita GDP was below $200. And then, thank goodness, Chairman Mao Zedong died. And thank goodness his son was killed in Korean War. So a lot of us are forever grateful to whoever bombed that shelter in Korea, okay? Because it could very well be North Korea situation. You know, he could have passed his throne to his son, Mao Zedong, right? So thank goodness for scrambled egg fried rice, because the rumor says he was in a shelter, and then they were not allowed to cook anything so that the smoke would actually reveal the location, right? And then your army, your bombers would like bomb them, and then Chairman Mao Zedong's son wanted to have egg fried rice, and then that's the smoke, and then the bombers actually killed them. And then people in China sometimes will say, thanks to egg fried rice. Okay, so Mao Zedong died in 1976. And then Deng Xiaoping became the de facto leader. He never took the top position in China, by the way, but he became the de facto leader in China. Deng Xiaoping visited US, I think in 1978. He was shocked. He asked to visit a regular people's house. That regular people's house has 3 bedrooms and a swimming pool. He was like, oh my goodness, this is better than mine residence. And then he went back, he's like, we can no longer continue on this socialism thing. We need to experiment with the capitalism thing. And then so he designated a small village across the little river from Hong Kong, say, hey, let's experiment with market economy, capitalism in this area. So that was a small fishing village called Shenzhen. Today, Shenzhen is a city of 20 million people. And then one of the top 4 most vibrant cities in China, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou, right? So the reform started. Foreign direct investments were welcomed into the country. Initially, the first investors were all from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and Southeast Asia, because there are a lot of overseas Chinese living in these areas. So when the West was still kind of not sure what is going on in China, these overseas Chinese were the first to actually invest and open up the whole country for the rest of the world. From 1978 to 1989 was the first phase of that open up. Then 1989, the Tiananmen Square massacre took place. That led to about 3 years of I wouldn't say stop, but the West was basically sanctioning, right, China, and then the more kind of leftist part of the party tried to move China back to more socialism. And then Deng Xiaoping actually did a tour of the South and then restored the course into the economic reform. And then the next period that was very critical is, the event took place in 2001 is when China was accepted into the World Trade Organization. So if you think about the per capita GDP in 1980 was under 200 US dollars. By 2001, it was about 1,000 US dollars. What was the per capita GDP of China last year? $12,800. So that was like a huge jump from 200. So that's why in the 40-some years, China went from a really, really poor country to mid-income, I would say, because 1,200 is not developed yet, but it's definitely a big difference from before. So that's the economic growth from 1980 to 2021. So right now, nominal value, Chinese economy is the second in the world, right? But if you calculate by purchasing power parity, actually the size of Chinese economy passed that of US in 2014. So in that year, US GDP that year was like 21.7 trillion US dollars. Chinese economy adjusted by purchasing power was 21.9, I believe. So that was the year when IMF considered Chinese economy already passed in purchasing power size. Per capita, China still has a long way to go. It was still at 12,000. US is like 60,000, right? I don't know how many of you are interested in business, but like McKinsey was talking about how China as a market is of significant value to the companies worldwide, right? So, for instance, electric vehicle, China actually represents 40% of global spending on electric vehicle, right? And then also it's growing 7 times faster than the global average, right? So if you think about aspirational goods, China is an outsized market, meaning it's actually bigger than its level of economic development would actually suggest. So luxury goods, premium beauty and personal care products, high-end cars, China is all the largest market in the world. So if you think about auto sales, 2018, China sold 29 million cars, which is car sales in US plus Germany plus Japan, plus another 250,000. That's how big the market there is. I mean, they have so many people, right? I just wish they don't go the same route as us, because we won't be able to, some people would say, hey, you know what, US has 860 cars per 1,000 people, right? So China still has a long way. I'm like, no, let's wish China would not go that way. We won't be able to breathe if you in China and India started to drive like us, right? Or unless we have breakthrough technology, of course, okay? I'm not gonna go into business, so I'm gonna stop here and then just see. I'm sorry, I think I took a little longer than I should. Any questions? That's why China is also one of the largest imports of oil, right? So right now, for instance, China is buying a lot of oil from Russia, just like India. They have some. They have some. Yeah, but they are a big importer of energy. So that's why if China's economy slows, Brazil, will suffer, right? Because Brazil is a major resource exporting country, right? Mhm. Yeah.
That very large dam that they've got operating here 4 or 5 years ago or whatever, is that out?
Many
out
years
to
ago.
that full capacity now?
Which is actually on the Yangtze River. Let me see if I can. Yeah, on the Long River, right? Let me go back to that river picture.
I'm assuming that made a major difference in
Where is, okay, so it's somewhere here. The Three Gorges, it's called Sansha. Three Gorges, because there is a big elevation, right? Big difference in elevation from, there are 3 tiers of elevation. So first tier, second tier, and third tier. So the elevation of Tibet is, of course, the highest plateau in the world, right? So basically, Yangtze River had a big job. That's why they built this dam here. It's one of the most controversial kind of a project, I would say, because a lot of people say a dam like that would change ecology and all that, and then it hasn't delivered as much electricity as it promised. And it hasn't played as good a role in preventing flood as it promised, which is the argument against it. But then there are, of course, people who said, okay, you know what, it actually allowed ships, ocean-going ships, to go all the way to Chongqing. So there's economic value to that. And then,
What was the displacement of people?
Oh, a lot. More than 1 million people were relocated. Yeah, and then some of the Asian cities is now underwater, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was the longer-term impacts of the one-child, two-child policy?
That was eliminated in 2016, right? It was a horrible policy to begin with, because the implementation can be very cruel. It's so absolute and cruel, right? Only one child, especially if you live in the city, there's no way almost zero way to go around it, because you wouldn't be able, if you have a second child, you'll lose your job, which means you won't have your ration, right? And then you'll be criticized, and then your child cannot go to get that household registration, then your child wouldn't be able to go to school and everything. So in the city, it's almost absolute. So that led to a ton of forced abortions and late stage. It was just a horribly implemented, cruelly implemented policy. But that also artificially created today's kind of a problem for China. Basically, China is now, as they said, getting old before getting rich, right? So now it's becoming an old society, right? Because you didn't allow people to have babies. So, but people are living longer, so you end up becoming an older, more senior-based kind of society before you get rich. So the labor shortage problem, can you imagine in world's most populous country, actually companies are actually having work shortage, labor shortage problems. So there are different reasons for that. So if you think about, if you are the only child, right, then you would have 2 parents, 4 grandparents who will dote on you. And then even if you are from a peasant, poor family, you will be like, I wouldn't say spoiled, but like you would not be expected to work as hard as your parents do, right? So the migrant workers in China who helped to create the economic miracle, their children probably were less likely to work like that, right? Okay, and then second is then the population is still growing, but now it's at a decreasing rate of return, so which can have significant impact. So that's why in 2016, China actually lifted that one child, saying, hey, you cannot have 2. Within a year or 2, say, hey, now you can have 3. But people are not having second or third. Because in the city, raising a child is not just costly money-wise, it's time-wise. Chinese families, remember that education thing that the Imperial system actually built into our collective unconsciousness? Education is important, education is important. So like, you can be a Chinese family living in a very, very poor area of China, and then if you survey them, hey, what do you want your child to do? I want him to go to college, you know. So, and then Chinese family on average spend at least 1/3 of their household income on their kids' education. It's crazy. I think it's the same in the U.S., you know. Overseas Asians, it's not just Chinese, Koreans, same thing. You know, they have this, I call it Ivy League religion. Ivy League, you know, it's like, you know, I'm gonna send them my friends told me, if my kid can get into Harvard, I'll sell my kidney if needed. That kind of attitude, right? So the competition is like terrible. So my niece's son has to take English after school English class Tuesday, piano Thursday, math Friday, Saturday morning is something. So it's like all kinds of classes that you have to take your kids. So that's money, but also time, right? So it's just crazily expensive and time-consuming to raise a child, and then your child has to compete fiercely in the job market, right? The famous 996. So in China, tech companies, you're supposed to work 9 to 9, 6 days a week, 996 they call it. It's just horrible. So it's like all these young people, millennials, are like, I don't want to have kids. I can't afford to have kids. I don't even want to have one. You want me to have second and third? So like even though not the policies like encouraging them to have kids, people are not having that's second and third children. So China is going to have a big problem population-wise. India is going to be the world's most populous country next year, 2023, actually. Yeah. Yes? Uh-huh. Oh, so for instance, if I go to Japan, I pretty much can find my way around because they have kanji all over, right? So I would be able to say, oh, that's for male, that's for female, for instance. And then I actually, for my PhD dissertation, I actually worked with Japanese direct investments in the world database. So sometimes I have to go back to look at the original database, which was in Japanese. I had no problem figuring out most of the things. Mm-hmm. The Kanji System, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So for instance, in manufacturing, there's a famous Kaizen system. Frank, you would know, right? Kaizen in Japanese means continuous improvement, right? In Chinese, it's 改善, Kaizen, 改善. 改善 means improvement, right? So, but there was also a lot of language in Chinese which was originally, so the English language or German language translated by Japanese, and then it moved into Chinese language as well. So for instance, policeman, 警察, was actually coming from Japan in a roundabout way into, and then the Ganbu, Carter. Right? So there are a lot of languages actually. The modern concepts actually was first because Japan had this away from Asia into Europe movement, right? I think around the Chinese Opium War time, when Japan was defeated by U.S., they actually switched. They are like, oh no, the Chinese system is no longer the best in the world. We are going to totally go pick up the educational system from Germany, military system from Germany, and then that's so Japan translated all the Western classics into the Japanese language, and then China then introduced a lot of that into Chinese. So a lot of the terms in Chinese actually came into the Chinese language that way. But the Japanese and the Korean, they all have a kanji system. Okay.
I want to make a statement, then I'm going to ask you a question about
Okay.
Taiwan.
Okay.
Okay? I took students to Taiwan, and we visited the American Embassy, which is not called the American Embassy. It's called the American Institute of Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called that because
There's no diplomatic relationship.
diplomatic relationship with the United States. So there's a lot of things happening today in Taiwan question I have really is, it's a potential major conflict area. What do you think mainland China is going to do with Taiwan over the next 6, 12, 18 months?
If Taiwan is to declare independence, China would take military action. I have no doubt about that. Well, because, remember that alternative unity and disunity. Chinese started to associate unity with stability. So because if you look at the history, right, when there's unity, you can still live poor, but at least you don't have to worry about wars, right? So Chinese people has a saying called, you'd rather be a dog during peaceful time than being a human during the warring stage, because then lives can be lost like nothing, right? So Chinese people have started to think, okay, when you have unification, actually, there will be no wars and there will be stability. So unity started to have some kind of a connotation for stability. So no leader would want to be remembered as the one who permanently lost Taiwan. So even though functionally Taiwan is an independent state, right? Its own army, raises its own tax, has a vibrant democracy and all that. But if you declare independence, then mainland would take military action, unfortunately. It was, well, so Taiwan was an island, and then it had a kingdom for a while, and then Taiwan was colonized by Netherlands and Spain in the 17th century. And then during the Ming Dynasty, one general actually, they called it took back China, right? And then chased, Dutch chased Spanish away. And then Zheng Chenggong, that general from mainland, then chased away the Dutch. So then during that period of time, Ming was replaced by Qing, the northern tribes. And then, but this Zheng family actually declared that they still remain loyal to Ming emperors for quite some years, until 1683, when they surrendered to the Qing, the new emperor in China, and became part of Qing Dynasty.
So it did belong to China at one time.
Yeah, and then in 1895, remember China had a war with Japan, and then China lost, because China has been losing since Opium War. And then Japan took Taiwan as part of the treaty, because China lost that war in Jiawu Haizan, right? And then from 1895 to 1945, Taiwan was ruled by Japan. And Japan actually ruled with a rather tight hand, let's say. So, for instance, people were forced to learn Japanese. No Chinese was allowed in the elementary school and all that. So a lot of people who grew up that period, they still speak the language, of course. They actually were forced to learn Japanese at school, right? And then 1945, when the World War II ended, then the United Nations told Japan, hey, you have to give it back to China. So Taiwan was then returned to China. Japan retreated out of Taiwan. So that was yeah, I would say Taiwan was part of China, right? And then actually Taiwan officially is still known as Republic of China, right? For many years before Taiwan became a democracy, Nationalist Party was the ruling party. They have been talking about taking back mainland forever, and then which obviously became an impossible mission, right? And then and then the Democratic Progressive Party in Taiwan really want to win independence. So right now the ruling party, the party right now in power is the Democratic Progressive Party. So what the Democratic Progressive Party did was they actually started to change people's perception through education. So for instance, they now teach Chinese history as part of the world history in the school system. So they're trying to call it de-Chinalize Taiwan. Okay, still use the same language, but they try to de-China. If I'm living in Taiwan, I would not want to be unified with today's mainland. That's for sure, right? I mean, if you have lived in a freer, more or less democratic society, you don't want to go than living in an autocratic society. Right, so, but I think the original, the hope of the mainland was like, because the economies are becoming more and more integrated, right? So the mainland originally was hoping that over time it'll naturally become integrated, right?
One major concern for the U.S. right now is computer chips.
Mm-hmm.
Computer chips are made in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And China would overtake Taiwan. America is in a lot of duty
Mm-hmm.
in terms of computer chips. We
Mm-hmm.
have 20,000 cars, parking lots around the state
Yep.
without computer chips.
Mm-hmm.
Not able to even
Mm-hmm.
finish them.
Yeah, that's why we passed this CHIP Act.
Right. And we hope we get it built in a hurry, because
Yeah.
we would certainly be at the mercy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Taiwan Semiconductor, the founding CEO said, the cost of making chips in U.S. is way, way more than double the cost of making it in Taiwan, right? And then also, for instance, Taiwan Semiconductor is going to build a facility in Arizona, right? And then even though Arizona government has been trying very hard to train engineers and stuff, actually TSM, Taiwan Semiconductor, TSC, they're still worried that they may not be able to get enough engineers. I feel like if we really want to change the situation, one thing we have not been doing is to improve K-12. I'm surprised how inadequate our STEM education in K-12 is. It's pathetic.
I was listening to a speech by the president of China, and he was directly discussing people's rights in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and he addressed their quality of life, and he was encouraging people from those two areas to come back and visit the new parts of mainland China
Mm-hmm.
and see the lifestyle change.
Mm-hmm.
The idea he was promoting is that you're suffering in those places, and you're too crowded. You would like it if you reintegrated.
I'm not sure whether I think what he was trying to say is probably more like, because mainland used to be perceived as having horrible lives, quality of life, right? People, low living standard and everything. So people in Hong Kong and Taiwan used to live a much better life, right? I still think much better life than today's China. But now the party started to feel confident enough saying, hey, you know what, our people are not doing that bad. So that was more kind of what he was trying to say. But I don't think people in mainland, in Hong Kong and Taiwan didn't know that, because many people from Taiwan and Hong Kong visit China, and then a lot of them actually now live in mainland. Outside of Shanghai, Kunshan, for instance, has a high concentration of merchants and workers from Taiwan living there. Actually, they even have their own community there. So I don't think that's even an issue. I think it's more like what happened in Hong Kong scared people in Taiwan a lot. Because if you think about Taiwan, Hong Kong used to be the #1 financial center in Asia. Actually, #3 in the world, right? New York, London, and Hong Kong. But because of what has been happening in Hong Kong, with the party trying to have more political control over Hong Kong, which scared the businesses, financial institutions especially, they definitely need to have rule of law. And then when the party started, in an autocratic society, meaning one party has absolute power, when you have that, or it can be a king, right? But in a monarchy, when the king has absolute power, or in a theocratic country like Saudi Arabia, when one religion has absolute power, you cannot have rule of law, because some party is above the law. Then you cannot have rule of law. And as a financial institution, that can be very scary. So now Singapore just last month became, financial transaction actually more take place in Singapore than in Hong Kong. So Singapore has also received a lot of billionaires fleeing out of mainland into Singapore. So Singapore is now actually replacing Hong Kong as the number 3 financial center. So it's that Xi Jinping has been, well, there's nobody. Nobody's going to report. But anyway, so if you think about Xi Jinping is definitely putting the party's interest above that of the country, which is natural. I mean, all parties ended up liking that. I kind of think our Democratic Party and Republican parties are putting their party's interest above that of the whole country, right? All organizations can become like that when they have been in power for a while. So the party's interest, from the party's perspective, think about when the economy opens up. Over time, China has been able to pull it off, saying, hey, we have a politically autocratic kind of system, but I'm giving people economic freedom. So Chinese people, remember Confucius teaching is very secular. So Chinese people has this enthusiasm to pursue this worldly success. So China becomes very prosperous, right? Economic growth, significant. But over time, that economic development probably is going to demand politically more distributed power. So in a way, market economy and democracy kind of work better together rather than the other way around, right? So from party's perspective, they want to be in power forever. Any organization probably would be like that. But from the country's perspective, then maybe to continue with the economic growth, maybe the political reform should continue. So Xi Jinping definitely took the party's interest above that of the country. So he tried to take more control of people's life, right? And then that lead to some of the actions in Hong Kong, which scared people in Hong Kong as well as people in Taiwan. Okay. I don't think he wants to give up his power. We will know in another month. He has already gotten rid of the term limits. You know, we were like excited. Oh no, they actually have term limits now. No, he took that away. So he's going to continue ruling. He wants, right? I think he wants. I don't know whether, I think enough people in China has benefited tremendously from the economic reform of China. I think, or I hope, the majority of the people in China would not go back, right? So for instance, you can see the struggle. So Xi Jinping in 2009 or 2010 said about, okay, the state needs to advance, the private sector needs to recede, right? So he said we need to make the state-owned companies stronger and bigger, right? But then that's kind of give the private sectors a cold feet, and then that would actually hurt the economic growth, and then obviously people would say, hey, President, you can't say that. And then he would say something like, oh yeah, we totally would encourage the private sector to continue to grow. So you see that back and forth and back and forth. I hope, like people, I mean, if you have lived through Cultural Revolution and that, and then now, it's like day and night difference, right? So I hope people will not go. But I don't know, like Iran went from like, you know, girls wearing miniskirts to that, right? So I don't know. I mean, human beings are weird. I mean, we can backpedal sometimes, like big time, right? I don't know.